Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jennifer Franklin. I am the program director of the Hudson Valley Writer Center, and I'm very happy to have all of you here tonight. It's a snowstorm where I am in New York City right now, and where many of you are, I think, in Westchester County and in the Northeast. So stay safe during this blizzard. I want to thank all of the foundations and grantors who have made this evening possible and our reading series on Zoom possible in general. We are supported in part by Arts Westchester and by NISCA and by the Bydale Foundation, the David G. Taft Foundation, the Rotary Club of the Tarrytowns, the Gannett Foundation, the Alan B. Silfka Foundation, the Thendara Foundation, Zand Charitable Trust, Westchester Community Foundation, Rockefeller Philanthropy, and members, students, and guests. I also want to give a special thank you to the board of the Hudson Valley Writers Center, the program committee, and the committee members of Slappering Hall Press, and of course, our founder, Margot Taft-Stever, who is a wonderful award-winning poet, and she is the founding and current co-editor of Slappering Hall Press. So we wouldn't be able to do all of the things we do for readers, for writers, if we didn't have our board and our Slappering Hall Press Advisory Committee, of course, Margot, and these wonderful foundations supporting us, and all of you. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you picking your Zoom reading at the center tonight. I know that there are a lot of Zoom readings out there, more and more all the time. And this is a special reading because Lynn Emanuel was supposed to read for the center with our partnership for Westchester Poetry Festival back in April. And that was the beginning of April. It was before we moved to Zoom. And it was before we really knew how long we were going to be on Zoom. So Lynn reached out to me sometime during late summer, I think, and said, maybe we should schedule this reading and not wait for next April. We still don't know what's going to happen, by the way, next April. So you were very wise to suggest that. And Lynn had these two wonderful poets to suggest to me. So I'm really happy that this worked out and we could end the year and the virtual reading series with this reading tonight. So first, we're going to hear from Lucia LoTempio, the author of Hot with the Bad Things by Alice James Books, 2020. You can find her poems in Passages North, The Journal, Typo, Quarterly West, and as part of the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series. With Susanna Russ Spar, she co-authored the chapbook Undone in Scarlet, published by Tammy in 2019. She lives and writes in Pittsburgh. And I'm going to be putting the information about her Alice James collection in the chat for all of you to see. So please help me welcome Lucia. I'm going to ask her to unmute.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Lucia LoTempio. Thank you so much to the Writer Center for having me here today. And thank you so much to Lynn for inviting me. And yeah, I'm going to read a little bit from my book, Hot with the Bad Things, which I also should thank Lynn for. I started writing this book in grad school and I started putting it together in her manuscript course. And I also want to thank Lauren Russell, who's reading tonight, who served on my manuscript committee and was really instrumental in, all things with this book. So thank you to both of you. Yeah, so I'm going to read from Hot with the Bad Things. I'll read a couple new-ish poems at the end. Just a little bit of background on Hot with the Bad Things. It's a lyric sequence of untitled prose poems. Much of the book deals with and talks about violence against women, particularly on college campuses, and it draws a lot from personal experience. Like I do consider this book something of a hybrid. Yeah, I think that's enough. That's enough background. So I'm going to read. Oh, I should also mention, as I was deciding what to read today, it is also really snowing quite a lot in Pittsburgh right now. And so the book, much of the location takes place in upstate New York, where there is a lot of snow. So snow is really featured. So I picked all the snow poems. So yeah. All right. I kept waking after the moment of plunge. Smell thick, warm, humid, dark. A knife to raise on the floor, a quick reach. It was after the flood of posts. The man murdered the girl and her new lover. I was just a few months gone. I posted a picture too, a sunset posing as sunrise. Red hearts like playing cards. As if I could play this mirror game. As if she could light through me, as if I am at the quiet swirling center. Here it opens with a metal snap. It is teeth put in a swinging hand. Puncture, closeness. In any case, some blood moves in something. If telling a story is the mark of victory, what does that make me? Maybe power is like language, hard to nail down and relentless. Smiling at a man who is waving to someone behind you. When I write about the girl, I don't know a way that isn't obliteration. The heart is flexible, pure creamed flesh, if it flushed out all its blood. As if I could touch her. And then there are so many things a touch can be. If I'm at the wheel of this semi-truck, I'm not opening on to a long stretch of highway. I'm not careening into a meticulously laid brick wall. I'm a fever with the girl. I'm a fever with the things the man did to her. In Geneseo, there's a tree smacked with lightning, made lopsided like a children's book. Splinter sanded down by years of snow. Vibration charted like an echo. Here, a bright circle like lightning, but not blinking. Here, a circle begins at a weapon and can be penetrated. One day, you thought, I will be a big van bartering snow. My body a chilled, beautiful blue. Eliza shifting a metal scrape of gears. Town to town, shake out wares like lived on carpet in a stairwell. The place with all the men will be desperate for some slush, gray as the fur on my back, freckled with pine, squirrel tail. When they reach to their pockets, pack up, hot tire, screech off, tell them, under this skin, more skin. But I laid out on campus, concrete and ash anointed bare back. But it was the August heat thunder. But I don't want this to just be. Held me by the corners of my mouth, made me a fucked up smile. But I wanted it. But I was August heat thunder. I wanted it. I told him I wanted it. But I walked to the gas station for something to fry up. I told him I wanted that. But I wanted him to prop the door open. Once he tied your arms and legs to your throat, demanded you crawl because he made you immobile. I think a person can be there without being there. You used to cry so much, wipe snot and cold tears on the skirts of little dresses. It's overwrought to say, but true. Can I make you sorry? Make you say you would be better if you knew what I know now? What do I even know now? I am full of fear. I was once a hand that went from overripe berry to next, a knife that cut nothing thicker than cake. Say you were bloated with a place. Say you used to kick rock salt, rush from beds. Prime for echo, shouting into the cleft of two walls. And as for apology, say it. Say it. I want to hear you fucking say it. I used to think I needed to instruct you, as if I had been a little mouse who needed teaching. Sweet mouse, you will not ask what makes a predator. There is something shadowed after you. It is less in the corners with metal snaps, and more at the tip of your long and wonderful whiskers, and often it has whiskers too. At the end of any fable, a mouse, victorious. I'm not sure how to maneuver that moral, little sweet. A predator as recognized by a growling no, like a heater in the next room humming that sounds like red herring. Predator when the knife is in hand, yes, and also how it's raised, even just briefly pressed, without breaking, to moving flesh. Knife when the predator is at hand. Once the body of a man was always a sharp edge, not anymore. The ones that still come to a point I'm realizing are made clear, so bright, like metal, all metal, just glint in the sun. Small death, small shame. Photograph of a small room emptied. Portrait of women killing Orpheus, body small in death, in pieces. I did not find pleasure in that, a small death. Do you feel shame when you are dead? Something always lives on, small. When you are dead, know this hand is yours. No one comes to claim it. Told me a rape is a small death. Something still lives. A blasphemous love for myself, and not small or dead. There is nothing triumphant about red rising like next day. Okay, I'm just gonna read a couple more. I've been jumping around the book, but this will sort of take us to the final poem in the book. It's funny. Memory can be such a flashbang, shock of recognize, crack of knuckles reaching for a bunch of grapes, rough slats covering a mailbox, squishy air freshener in a Rite Aid bright light. When I think of him and how he did the bad things, it's never on purpose or even in the same way. It feels like I'm repeating myself because I'm repeating myself. I saw two people coming down the sidewalk toward me, the man walking backwards while facing the woman. When they turned, I saw there was a large thing carried between them. The mouth opens like it's just blunt entry. I want to have sex with what I want to become, says the poet. I think I should feel very broken down, very rotten, but I am open like the hull of a ship with stairs ascending. When I see a grease fire, it's a trash fire. It's a car engine fire. It's on the belly of a great lake. I'm always looking for solution, but an equation would be too elegant. Siri says, "Thank you for your feedback," when you call her naughty girl. I know I shouldn't be filling any cup to splash. When I say grease fire, I mean nothing else. I mean grease fire. I tell my lover to throw me onto the bed and he refuses. What happens when you are hot with the bad things? When I was younger, I felt a tenderness that was uninterrupted. Now, when I feel it coming on, I think I know where it started. When I open, I need to know who, or when my mouth opens, it's full of fire and still so hungry. A man I know posted a documentary about any campus. #rewatching. When I watched that film, I was so mad. I already knew everything they told me. Who is that for? Who are these poems for? A hashtag has an edge. Lead me out, red exit neon, when the tacit applause comes. There are so many things he did to me, and I don't want to just say. My small, small self, my little warm nub. I see your body everywhere, flat on cement, spread eagle and pulled to a point where your paws should be. Sometimes waterlogged, and others matted mud. It's still coming. It's still happening, even when I step over you and look at the sky. A little moss on the wall, how do I tell him? Every time a man touches, it's better with the promise of worse. I love a man, how do I tell him? My mother says I don't seem happy at all. He forgets to lock the door at night, how do I tell him? A sweet mass of something big that presses. Life is amazing, I say when a friend asks. How do I tell him? I'm kneeling on a chair, wobble and sweat. Life is amazing. I repeat louder, then louder, then louder, then louder, and believe it. All right, just two more. Still, I bring a strange hand to my lip and say, this. Oh, actually, I'm not going to read this one. I'm going to read the one on the other page. He lives in California now, near our old friends. I pretend I don't already know when one tells me over drinks. He asked about you, asked if he was allowed to ask. He said, is she doing good? I hope she's doing good. His voice no longer a gas leak down a hallway, stovetop fume without spark. The snow outside the window should stop, freeze midair, become a curtain to walk through. I think he knows he was a pretentious ass back then. You can tell he feels awful about the way he was. She adds, he's more aware. I don't know how to use this information. Even now, as I write, I have no direction for the curved line that touches him. When other poets read this, they suggest I take it out. It humanizes him, but humans do terrible things, and they do them all the time. Another shared article, collaged photographs that don't match, her lover, her, the murderer, the house, grass peeked through snow, red garland forgotten, two people bundled. From the side, they look so close together, legs in sync, like this one a woman and the other a shadow. The bear on the fountain in the center of Geneseo, like a pit in a peach, like the stomach of a body. A truck hit it last winter, then another a month later, and again last week. When I go back, it won't be there. It'll be like I'm not going back at all. A silly hope, as if everything that ever happens in a place has an edge, like an aerial shot of it. That memory could be stilled, then framed, like a penned up animal. Okay, so that was from How With the Bad Things. I'm gonna read two newish poems. Yeah. I think when we were sort of chatting before, Lauren, you said you wrote one poem this year. So did I. This is the one poem I wrote this year, and I'm gonna read one of the very few poems I wrote in 2019. Okay. Avoidance. Void with no end, back wall of the sky. Would the stars be as beautiful without the space between them? I think a sheet of unending light would be terrifying, with stars as last gasps, frozen in millennium lag. My friend says real beauty usually is terrifying, alien. Who cares about beauty? What do you do with anger? A seething heat of I was. On the portrait, an example of restoration is the square of scar on open hand, the feather mid-molt, the pinpoint. Is it beautiful or useful to arrange the whole world as flat? I'd like to say that I don't care. How do you part with anger? What satisfies about a ghost put to rest is not its peace, but its change in beingness. I suck the sting in the crux of my nail and thumb from a pepper ripped in half hours ago, seeds cloistered constellation. How do you compress anger to one concise bit of matter? I can't. Two objects are not able to be in the same place at once, and a child smacks her hands together and says, "No, see? I was not that child, but the one yelling that she was wrong. I've never yelled in a poem, perhaps for beauty. Before I wrote as if I was speaking to a plant, the soft words irrelevant, converted to something that stopped in my lungs briefly. A tender coddle, a grooming, anger lilting lightly from a lush bed. I once saw a swatch of lilies, striped midnight and purple, in a garden, and I imagined how I might say to their owner that they made my day, though they hadn't. I imagined severing their roots and leaving behind their little bodies, rolling a petal to oil between my fingers. But I didn't. They just grew there in their stupid dirt, and I saw them as I ran by. And one more poem, and I wrote this poem after my friend Stephanie Colley. For a year, I didn't say a word. For a year, I didn't say a word. A damp moss spread unnoticed, or so I thought. My friend had a horse on a bridle, a body of beaten to something else. I'd love for her to take my bridle, or else help me into a different muscled body. I didn't know about the underground volcano in Wyoming that's past due to cover us all in a thick layer of ash. Don't worry. At the precipice of the unfathomable, what's plus or minus 10,000 years? The woman behind me talked about proselytizing in Pittsburgh versus New York versus Philadelphia versus Portland versus Denver, which sounded exhausting. Good on her to find me in a coffee shop. In my cellar, the stone walls erode with consistency, a crumble of dust, cradled in a makeshift base. But it wasn't my cellar. It was a room we ate in, even. A dog perhaps whining and not being told no, or locked in a cellar without a scrap. Where was that bit of rock carried off to, and how? I'd like to think the wish of my heel broke down something born of teams of men and specialized technology. What did it mean to be a girl? I don't care to remember. When I was the horse, it was much easier to say yes. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was such a great reading. So don't forget, you can get Lucia's book from Alice James. You can get it directly from the press, right? Did it just come out?
It came out in May of this year.
Okay. Strange year to have a book released, I know.
Yeah, but I'm really grateful for stuff like this, where we're able to, still experience poetry, and yeah, so thank you.
It's true. It's been one of the only silver linings of the pandemic that we can have groups from all over the country. You probably wouldn't have been able to come from Pittsburgh to read here. Thank you so much. Now we're going to go to Lauren Russell. Lauren is the author of Descent and What's Happening on the Hush, a 2017 NEA Creative Writing Fellow in Poetry. She has also received fellowships from Cave Canem and the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and residencies from the Rose O'Neill Literary House at Washington College, the Malay Colony for the Arts, and City of Asylum, Pasaporta. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, the Brooklyn Rail, Cream City Review, Diagram, and the anthologies Bettering American Poetry 2015 and Furious Flower Seeding the Future of African American Poetry, among others. She was Assistant Director of the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics at the University of Pittsburgh from 2016 to 2020. In the fall of 2020, she joined the faculty of Michigan State University. Please help me welcome Lauren Russell.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to Lynn for inviting me. Thank you to Jennifer and everyone at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. It's really, it's such a pleasure. As Lucia mentioned, I was on Lucia's committee and Lynn was on my committee for my first book, What's Hanging on the Hush, or the manuscript that became it. So this is really special for me, and they're two of my favorite poets and people, so thank you. As Lucia also mentioned, I have finished one poem this year. So I'm going to start with that one and then I'll read from the book. So I have to give special thanks to two people, my colleague, Robin Silberglide, who gave me the prompt that actually got me going, and my friend Sean Yu, who designed Opposites, Surrealist game app, from which a few of these images were generated. And it's referencing this Rene Magritte painting called The Listening Room, where there's a giant apple that's taking up the entire canvas, basically. First dispatch from the listening room. Why do you want to be less than a sentence? You say to one lone amoeba who quakes under the scrutiny of 5,000 unyielding microscopes of uncertainty. In the time of the virus, you begin to catalog all your griefs and their subordinate scabs. Love collapsed and dead cat, and also months of inhaling only your own exhalations. Or do you mean exhumations, say the wary green eyes of the newfound cats? Your labels refuse to join with verbs. Your fragments want to remain inactive. When your glasses fog up on your evening walk, 2 hours before they abruptly split down the bridge and break apart, you tear your face mask off and smell, for the first time in how long, charred flesh or exorcisms roasting on a backyard spit that just keeps spinning. The sky darkens, aflutter with winged dinosaurs of anxiety. Pterodactyls, pteranodons, passenger pigeons, moping geese. You think they are flying away from the jars, but the sky itself is bottling them. In this time of virus, sentences coagulate into knots. Predicates are freight elevators for hauling griefs. This one's full of that enormous apple of Magritte's. You'll be riding into the future progressive with too much rot and nowhere to breathe. All right, that's my one poem this year, just completed. So now I'm gonna read from Descent, the new book just out this year from Tarpaulin Sky. The backstory is that in 2013, I acquired a copy of the diary of my great-great-grandfather, Robert Wallace Hubbard, who was a Confederate captain in Hood's Texas Brigade in the Civil War. And after the end of the war, he went back to East Texas and had children by 3 of his former slaves who were also sisters. And one of them was my great-great-grandmother, Peggy Hubbard. And as I was typing up these 225 pages of diaries, I became really fascinated by everything that was being left out and spent years doing research and writing into that space. All right. Dear Robert, dear Redbeard, dear specter of the great white father, dear slaveholder, dear Confederate captain captured at Gettysburg, dear dispenser of land, favor, seaman, procreator of 20 children by 3 sisters simultaneously, dear father of the Negro League pitcher, dear farmer, schoolmaster, landlord, hired hand, grave paler, log roller, surveyor, and manure shoveler, dear singer, dear churchman and circus fan, dear reveler at brigade reunions, Dear collector of sentimental poems about loneliness and redemption. Dear pointy-eared like Lucifer and bearded beyond Rasputin. Dear mythical Jim Crow defier, hero of my grandfather's childhood, who took him on the whites-only section of the streetcar. He claimed this really happened, proclaiming, "These are my grandchildren and they're sitting with me." Dear diarist, dear widower, dear lonesome hunger, dear admirer of well-formed women, dear inscrutable in the tintype beside your favorite half-claimed child, dear tallier of payments, debts, work days, weather conditions, neighbors by name and race, dear borer of wells, dear master of omission. Heard a whippoorwill holler this morning for the first time this spring. Heard a whippoorwill holler, all hands choking cotton. Heard a holler, a whimper. Heard a will whip her. Will heard a whip. Whip or will. Will heard. Herding hers. Whipping herds. Sowing oats. Whipping whores. Stripping cane or. Whelped her, willed her, a well and a hold, dank of the dark, of the hell of the hold. Choking cotton, caught in, a yoke and a pole, stripped and caned for. Heard her holler, caught her, held her hand to the, whipped out your, held her head to the, whipped out the billfold. Heard a whimper this spring, choked or, heard a holler, a hollowed out hold, whipped to a wheelbarrow, hell bent toward a hole, ripped from a, wrapped in a gut wrench sugar hold. Question. So how did the women feel about this? Answer. Don't guess they had no say. This one starts with an epigraph from Decimus et Ultimus Barziza, escaped POW. I have many a time been actually and painfully thirsty, and yet in sight of an ocean of fresh water. That's the epigraph. Johnson's Island, winter 1863 through 64. That winter, the pipes froze and no longer brought water in from the bay. The guards ordered the men to dig 2 holes about 8 feet deep. They installed pumps, but still the water is always exhausted within an hour of reveille. He has forgotten to change his socks, and his toes are freezing in their own sweat. The wind claws at his eyelids and lips. The ice is driving at him in spikes, fearsome. And for a second, he thinks the wind is hammering nails into his face, that God Almighty is bent on paling his grave. But no, he is grateful for the warmth of the beard, ought to wrap it around him like a scarf. It is almost long enough. His thirst, gravel in his throat, his ears tingling and then suddenly numb. Heard a whippoorwill holler, heard a holler, a whimper, a whirlpool, a snicker, heard a stag kick her. Long hours between roll call and roll call, he tries to rewrite his own history, to erase the moment his ears popped, charging a Pennsylvania hill. Whip 'em, boys, whipped or not whipped yet. How you begin to doubt your own head. A shell exploding ahead, and even the screams of the man beside you are muted like cries from the shore when you are holding your breath underwater. The line's a scattered mess of boulders, but you're yelling, stand firm. Why? The rebel yell issuing from your own spent breath, though you cannot hear, but for a moment think you will make it to the top despite gunfire hailing down the forest, a dizzying maze of smoke and half-blinded retching. You run headlong into a tree before you are taken. How? Sword in the back, see yourself relinquishing your revolver to a first lieutenant from New York, some retribution for Second Manassas, the blue columns at Fredericksburg melting away. Look away, look away. The boy who disarmed him was younger than he, had curious auburn eyes that reminded Bob of some dogs he'd seen. Again, my great-great-grandmother's name was Peggy. Peggy rises out of sleep through the dream called blue, where all her kinfolks are wading through fields of blue. Even her father left in Georgia, her stillborn brother somehow grown, her niece who stumbled into the fire on Christmas Day and died with the vision of her white dress aflame, the aunt or uncle who ran off or was lost forever to the auction block. They are all wearing blue, blue hats, blue shawls, and in the way they sing a song with no words deep from the gut, there is also blue. And bluely she creeps toward them in her calico blue. And now there is a dance, they are partnering for the quadrille, and the man they called Bo Peep cradles a banjo, strikes a tune blue. And her petticoats starched with hominy water and Pris's too. And every time they stop moving for a second, the petticoats pop and Pris giggles, and in Pris's eyes are flecks of blue. The log train shakes her into waking, black then dark blue. And she reaches for her kerchief blue, and she is stumbling toward the cradle blue and cooing shoo shoo to the baby who is hollering now. One Sunday, the preacher prayed, Lord, let us all go to heaven where there'll be no log train. Hoo, 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 and a clankety clank, whoos, black smoke curling into the half blue. Bob. Can I be your lazy eye, your wanderlust, your grave without a headstone, your bleeding gums, your buck teeth, and your walk bow-legged at the knee? Can I be your fortune hunter, your glimpse of wild geese, your red russet shoes that poison the feet? Reckon this is the best of my seed, been stripping cane and blind, robbing the bees. Reckon you've thought of swimming the creek. Last night they came on horseback, white hoods like phantoms, scanning the trees, burning torches, shattering sleep. I dragged the shotgun from the door and stepped, squinting, onto the porch. I don't normally follow baseball, but I heard this announcement today that the Negro Leagues are being recognized as major leagues. So I'm reading this poem in honor of that. Jesse Hubbard was one of Bob Hubbard's 20 children. He was a Negro League pitcher, and he was called Mountain. And in the 70s, a baseball researcher interviewed him and a bunch of other Negro League players. And unfortunately, the interviews, the recordings are lost, but some form of something that I would not say was an exact transcription was published. But anyway, all of the language in this poem is taken from that. Jesse Mountain Hubbard. Man, I beat those guys so bad it was pitiful. The team that wanted me was the Tigers. They didn't sign me because Ty Cobb was there, and he didn't like color no kind of way. The team that wanted me bad was the Tigers. If Cobb saw us coming, he sat out the game. He didn't like color no kind of way. He'd grip the ball tight and bug his eyes. If Cobb saw us coming, he sat out the game. They used to accuse me of cheating, of cutting the ball. He'd grip the ball tight and bug his eyes. Well, I had something I could cut it with. They used to accuse me of cheating, of cutting the ball. If they threw drop balls in front of the plate, I'd kill them. Well, I had something I could cut it with. All I did was pull up my pants like this. If they threw drop balls in front of the plate, I'd kill them. Now that's part of the history of the Negro race. All I did was pull up my pants like this. When I got warmed up real good, I cut loose on them. Now that's part of the history of the Negro race. They didn't sign me because Ty Cobb was there. When I got warmed up real good, I cut loose on them. Man, I beat those guys so bad it was pitiful. I want to think that when the witness tree leaned into the ledge, it heard her heart stop between one breath and the next. The day they buried Peggy, all the trees were whispering, the chinkapins and loblolly pines. Did she miscarry, bleed to death, while Bob, our plunk, saddled the horse, rode miles panting after the doctor in town? Did she recall her mother's 20 pregnancies and bite her lips, her tongue the quilt, and finally the bedpost, lest her daughters hear her scream and come too close? Did she rage deliriously through the shakes, bloat from dropsy or hack through a consumptive fit? Or did she take her own life, swallow strychnine or arsenic, hang herself from a beam, clench a shotgun between her teeth? Peggy sometimes spoke in whispers. Sometimes she did not speak at all, but just said, uh-huh, leaning hard on the last syllable, or sure did, with all her weight on the first. Sometimes, if Bob looked closely, he would see a thought blow across her face. Once he might have tried to squeeze it out, but a woman is not sugarcane you can run through a mill, its secrets easily expelled. Peggy. Today I plucked a whippoorwill from down the bottom of the well. Her neck was broke, but still she hollered out her name. Get. The burst of freedom came in June. Go yonder way, I said. Once, when she was 16, Peggy finished cooking the hominy and drew pictures with ashes left on the hearth. When the Genographic Project says I am more Scandinavian than African, I don't know how to feel about it. If I went to Denmark in this skin, this smoking cyclone crown of frizz, and declared the findings, who would they convince? I'm told I am more Scandinavian than African and wonder where this belongs in the half-built book I am no longer living in. Bob Hubbard was always gathering moss for the mudcat chimneys he raised over Polk County. A county surveyor knew where lines bent. Did he leave behind a genetic map? Bob came through and made everybody kin, one of my cousins laughs. From Emma Haynes' History of Polk County, 1937. When the camp was established at Moscow, every house was closed and Negroes paraded up and down the streets. The next morning, 4 Negroes were found hanging to a tree. The Ku Klux Klan would control the Negroes and did to a great extent, but the citizens were kept in constant fear of a Negro uprising. Oh, that people loved peace rather than war. In the book I built, where I no longer live, some nights hummings in the walls, not wind hissing through chinks, but a human song that shifts in sleep and dips into a low diphthong. Peggy. That moon ain't hiding, clouds a shawl. Moon's cold as brass tacked upside night's frock. Pin your tears to her, they'll sing like chimes, or ghosts that cry. Sometimes I feel I'm almost gone. Ghosts charred in dead men's lust. Think I'm some fool, got brains of shucks? Since freedom I've been through the toughs. See, one moon casts your shadow twice, once toward the bottomland, once toward the pines. The wind's right smart, but moon, she's sly. Look, lightning bugs, they spark, but they cannot catch fire. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that reading. That was incredible. Please, everyone, buy these books from these great writers tonight. And thank you, Lynn, for bringing the three of you together for this incredible evening of poetry. What a great way to end 2020, which has been a very hard year, to say the least. Thank you so much, Lauren. That was really incredible. Thanks for introducing your work to so many of us here tonight. I cannot wait to read this book. Okay, Lynn Emanuel is the author. Let me unmute you before I read about you. There you go. Can you? Yep, perfect. Lynn Emanuel is the author of 5 books of poetry: Hotel Fiesta, The Dig, Then Suddenly, Noose and Hook, and most recently, The Nerve of It, Poems New and Selected. Her work has been featured in the Pushcart Pride Anthology and Best American Poetry numerous times, and has been included in the Oxford Book of American Poetry, the Norton Anthology of Hybrid American Poetry, and has been published in the New York Times. She has been a judge for the National Book Awards and has taught at Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Warren Wilson Program in Creative Writing, and the Bennington College Low Residency MFA program. She has, as you know, won many awards and fellowships, National Endowment for the Arts, the National Poetry Series Award, the Lenore Marshall Award, just to name a few. Her books have been reviewed in Poetry, the New York Times Book Review, the Harvard Review, LA Review of Books, BOM, and Publishers Weekly. She is the founder of the Pittsburgh Contemporary Writer Series, which she directed for 20 years. And here's her most recent wonderful book. So please, all of you, get the books from these writers tonight. There's still time for Christmas presents and the end of Hanukkah. So please help me welcome Lynn Emanuel.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? I know. Okay, great. Yes, it is really lovely to be here. And I have become a huge fan of Zoom because we are not limited by capability, by geography, by anything. There is snow up to my belly button tonight, and I certainly wouldn't be where you are. So this is one of my favorite ways of experiencing poetry. But also, I would like to thank Jennifer, because not only has she made the Hudson Valley Writers Conference a stellar occasion for poetry, but this new online reading series has been really so smart and so exemplary in the kinds of people that read here and the kinds of work that they read. So thank you, Jennifer. And she's also a fabulous poet, a mother, and a dog owner. I'm reading poems from a new manuscript, so I have far too many things to say, and all of them I think are quite obscure. The working title is Transcript of the Disappearance, Exact and Diminishing. And I think finally it's about the diminishing or the disappearance of private life under the pressure of the pandemic and under the erasure of private life under the weight of the now. It is, since all autobiography is essentially disappearance, even a diary in which you try and bring back the day before by reading it. I'm really interested in the way that all of my poetry in this collection is about a certain kind of disappearance. And I'm going to begin with some prose pieces that became the irritant to much of the rest of the book. And it's about growing up in my girlhood spent in post-war America, and about the famous cinematic genre of those times, film noir, and the way those films educated me about my own interesting, violent, claustrophobic existence. I have two epigraphs I'd like to share with you. The first by Brenda Shaughnessy, the second by William Faulkner. I was a woman alone in the sea. Don't tell anybody, I tell myself. Don't try to remember this. Don't document it. Remember, write down to not document it. What's it like there? What do they do there? Why do they live there? Why do they live at all? Disappearance, my life in film noir. They were documentary, an archive. In them, I could behold everything I had beheld, the paranoia, the violence, even the famous visual signatures were not a style. They were a record, a mirror of lived experience. My girlhood happened in black and white, and like noir films was dreamy, strange, erotic, ambivalent, and cruel. I will say that I also think that this little collection of prose is very much about class. During the late 40s and 50s, my mother and I lived on our own in a small residential hotel in a small, damp city. The Cold War was all around us, and I loved the feel of entrapment. There was a bedroom and a sitting room with a hot plate, a simple shut-in space, a door closing, a pipe with a noise running through it, running across the ceiling. All the windows faced other windows and stared into mine, and I was thrilled that I was not safe. My mother was a single working mother in the 1950s. World War II had barely ended. There was no child care for families like ours. There were no families like ours. When my mother traveled, I was left with friends, acquaintances, the ill-tempered and resentful family of a cleaning woman, where I slept on a canvas World War II cot that had been used to transport the wounded. I have to say that this little town that I talk about in Nevada is on US Route 80, which has been called by National Geographic the loneliest road in America. Disappearance. My mother's parents owned the Collins Hotel on US Route 80 in Ely, Nevada. The lobbies and hallways were tiled with black and white linoleum and lit with dim sconces. Each room contained an iron bedstead, a deal dresser, a sink. The windows were decked out with the same jaundiced blinds that hung in my friend Maria's windows. I saw this room time and time again at the movies, where the camera seemed to be waiting for me in that empty place. My mother was out of work and we were living in one of the hotel's vacancies. There was a whitewashed bedstead with a headboard whose iron bars had a Romanesque curve, a chenille spread nearly bald from my picking out the threads, and a dish filled with pine nuts on the deal dresser. I loved the idleness of my life at that time. I was not bothered by having to play with other children. There were no other children. I was deliriously alone and surrounded by adults. I would follow the maid on her rounds, trailing from room to room, a small, avid voyeur with a shaky handheld camera of my attentiveness. Aside from my grandmother, my mother, and the maid, I saw no women at the hotel, except for one. In her room, over the end of the unmade bed, hung a battered pair of white underpants, its core stained a deep red. The image was biblical, a shroud with a bloody mark, and the odor of the body was powerful. The maid opened a window, swabbed out the sink, and left. And I was impressed by the way the room was untouchable, the same way that I would feel later seeing the dioramas at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. The next day, I saw that woman wearing men's khaki pants and a flannel shirt, standing in the lobby with my grandfather, who was dropping coins into her outstretched hand. And after that, the window closes forever. Disappearance, collecting the evidence. Film noir is working class tragedy. Eddie Mueller, journalist, San Francisco, 1940s. And at the movies, I identify with the coroner. I enter the body. The movies teach me I am a dead man when I look at a dead man. Every image is a mirror. Every soundtrack is a gun. This is a movie about a blonde woman. On the screen, for the first time, I see my mother as something that is not my mother. In the dark theater, I don the heavy patent leather pocketbook with its bolus of dirty bills. A phone rings, as it is rigged to ring, while we stand and wait for the freight of our futures to arrive. And when it does, the door opens, and I am the gun with its neat rank of slugs. I am the hive of the blast. The director screams, "Cut." I perform the autopsy, and it's been going on for hours now, digging out the bullet, holding it to the light. The body lies in disarray. It is the evidence of what happened here. Whatever is meant by happen, whatever is meant by here, the killing is clear. Disappearance, body's language. Diction, syntax, and stutter, loyalties and befuddlements, stations of the cross and hoops to jump through. The body can be broken down to its layers and alleys, lobbies, vestibules, back to its interior scraps and slats, back to its original agenda, blueprint, schema, diagram, lath and plaster, joint, mud, vent, and bunghole. And the body can be cured or sundered or hired or rented. The X-ray screen shows the buried strata, the archaic pith, ribs, and tumor, the faint stockpile of the pregnancy, the delicate redundancy of the species, those wounds and ornaments. Naked, strung out, stranded, the body is by nature unmindful of us, disloyal and mortal and unguaranteed, and it wants to be uncuffed. And in a photograph, the body is an eye that will not meet our eyes, wearing itself as a language, as a body of thought. Disappearance, nativity. I was a garden, and you my gardener. I was a house, you, my lodger, alien life, lodge beneath my heart. My heart, you were the fist that knocked and knocked that I would not answer. You starved me down until a glance could pass right through me, and did, as I lay on the obstetrician's vinyl couches under the shroud of a sheet that stank from Clorox. They mined for you, their probes coated slick with the scentless oils of technicians, for whom I must be opened, peeled back, forced to look. And I did, as I was told, not relax exactly, but give myself up to your co-conspirators who dug you up out of the blankness of my flesh, parted the dark waters, and suddenly you came forth, a smudge of white against the ultrasound screen. You floated, spectral and thickly pale, a magnolia floating in a bowl, an elegant centerpiece. You had no heart. You were as minimal as a Mobius strip, but had style. Even your dying was oddly stylish, the way you resembled more and more each day a comet. The wan tail of you grew longer, more tenuous on the screen. I saw you calmly and with endearing gravity take a nosedive until the light blinked out and I was no longer a house for an uninvited guest, nor a heaven for a gauzy constellation. The screen went dark and I came back to myself. I was no longer a ghost's ghost. I was myself again. I was flesh and living. This is currently the sort of title poem of this ongoing manuscript. It's called Plague's Monologue. I have erased the world so nothing can find it, snuffed out the roses, red and hot as the snouts of bombs, repealed the polar ice cap, even that fat oxymoron, the industrial park, has disappeared. And the last few words, huddled together like bees in a hive, buzzing and plotting, I have cut their throats with the scythe of a comma, turned the snout of my pen against them. I have saved by erasing the streets and the people. Let them be overgrown with absence. I don't care. There is no limit to my appetite, my lust, my zeal for emptiness. But I know you, and you have kept a transcript of the disappearance. And I think I will end there.
Wow, thank you. What an amazing new manuscript, Lynn. When is it coming out? Do you know?
About the time that the pandemic is gone. No, it's really in progress.
Great, thank you so much. Could you guys do a brief Q&A for our audience? I'm sure everybody has questions. You can write them in the chat. I'm also going to ask Lucia and Lauren to unmute. And since we are a smaller audience than we sometimes are, because it's almost the holidays, I'm gonna just unmute everyone and ask at least the people with their videos on, ask to unmute so people can ask questions. You can just jump in and raise your hand. And you guys should all read the chat because you have a lot of adoring fans complimenting and quoting your words back at you. So before you leave, make sure to see the comments. Anyone want to jump in with the first question? Ellen, go ahead.
This question is for Lynn. What's the connection between film noir and the erasure of privacy in, say, the 21st century? And as you see it, as it's playing out in these poems that you're writing?
I think only that it's such a misread genre and a kind of belittled genre. You know, you say film noir and everybody thinks about the big hat and the blonde. And what interests me about it is that it was such a delicate and encompassing description of post-war life in America, filled with meanness, unfairness, cruelty, and issues of class, where the people who were poor and, you know, or working at a garage, always were pursued like bugs by people who were mobsters, who were, you know, underwritten by rich guys who were, but it was such a palpable feeling of terror and claustrophobia. And it reminds me of my own terror and claustrophobia currently. But what's interesting is the film noir poems came way before, and the pandemic seems to have thrown a net backwards, even capturing that which has, you know, which has disappeared, and, you know, you try inaccurately to retrieve it. I think that's the only, for me, the only connection right now.
Thank you.
We have some questions in the chat. Suzanne Cleary, for all of you, thank you for what you make of that sense of danger, large poems of our time. Okay, just a comment. And Robin has a question for Lauren and Lucia. What have you been doing if you're not writing poetry this year? How have you managed to stay grounded without that practice of writing?
I don't know if Lucia wants to answer.
Why not?
Well, Lauren has a new job and is very busy. That we've already ascertained from me asking her to teach a class at the center.
Yeah, I started a new job and relocated during the pandemic, and it hasn't been the most conducive time to writing. So I don't feel that I am staying grounded in that practice, and that's something I'm working on. I feel like I've been able to sort of generate material through these collaborative games in both with friends, with colleagues, with my students, but it's for the most part, they just sort of collect in a notebook, and I haven't really have like the time or space to do anything with them. I also think the other part of it is that for me, writing has always required this sort of very intense focus and sort of leaning into the moment. And these days, whenever I do that, I sort of start to fall apart because being in the moment is painful. And so I think there's also something about the mental health effects of the pandemic and of isolation that actually makes it harder to sort of exist in that space, and having these sort of external like collaborative exercises or something gives me a way in. know how Lucia will.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I have just been sort of like honoring that feeling of not feeling inclined to write and just you know, sort of coming, I don't know, becoming at peace with sort of taking a pause in that like writing practice as it has been before. Um, for me, before even I would say like summer of 2019, and I'm just sort of letting myself, um, I don't know, yeah, just taking care of my mental health and that sort of thing. And I found actually that during like this time in quarantine, I still like have been finding ways to be creative, and to sort of use that, I don't know, part of my self, I guess. So I've been doing a lot, like I've been trying to create more. I've been doing like visual art or even crafts or um, cooking and baking and that sort of thing. So there definitely is that draw towards making, but as of late, it's been maybe sort of what you're saying, Lauren, where writing takes a lot of mental energy and it does take a lot to be in the work. So I've been sort of veering towards creating things that that feel much more apart from me. Yeah.
We have a question from Marion Brown, and she loved this Lauren singing during the reading, and just was wondering about if Lauren, you imagine your readers, you know, carrying the tune, or how you imagine that to can be conveyed on the page. If you want to talk a little bit about that and just the craft of the collection in general and how you got your hands on that diary and all the research.
Okay, that sounds like two questions.
Yeah, I put mine in at the end of Marion's.
It's funny, I visited somebody's class once where I sang that song. Bob's in the prisoner of war camp and he's remember being captured at Gettysburg, and there's the look away from Dixie. And none of the the undergraduate students had no idea of Dixie, didn't recognize it. We're like, why did you sing that? So I don't know to what extent people on the page recognize the songs. I think it sort of depends on the audience. Some audiences immediately recognize Peggy's singing from Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child, but it's one of the other verses at the end. But it is interesting to like sort of see like what people recognize and what people don't. There's a couple references to songs in the book that I don't know. One of them I saw mention oral history, have no idea of the tune, so I can't sing it. And that's also interesting. So yeah. What was the other question was about how I got the diary. So my brother saw some mention of this diary, I want to say now it was probably over 10 years ago, on some sort of online genealogy forum or something, and gave me the project of getting a copy. And it wasn't even like he cared that much. It was just to have something to bug me about, or that's sort of what it turned into. So the first time I tried to get it was around 2009 or 2010. And I called, it's in this little, it's a copy, the original's lost, but there's a copy in this little museum and genealogical library in Polk County, Texas. And the first time they never sent it. And then my brother kept bugging me for years. And finally I got the copy in 2013 from this genealogical library. And yeah, that's how I got it.
It's really amazing what you've done with that document, and you know, the research, the combination of the research and the imagination. Other questions from people in the audience? Raise your hand. If you're on mute, I'll try to unmute you.
Aaron has a question in the chat.
Oh, good. Aaron, I'm gonna unmute you. Or if you want me to read
Okay,
it.
there we go. Yeah, I
There
was
we
trying
go.
to click on there. Yeah, my question was for Lauren. One of the things that I was really struck by in your work was your keen ear and you know, the way you use sound and rhythm. And I was just curious as to who your influences were or are.
Harriet Mullen, and also how Harriet Mullen is influenced by Gertrude Stein. I think those are the biggest. But Peggy always speaks in iambic pentameter, and that was I got from a forms class I audited with Jeff Oakes, and it was just sort of the luck that he gave us this assignment to write a poem in blank verse, and it was like the right voice for her because it's constrained, you know, and also created this really interesting idiosyncratic voice. And I just maintained it whenever she speaks, which also meant she didn't speak that much because it took me too long to write. So that became part of the character.
I wrote my question, but I'll just say it out loud. Lauren, because your book, because of your voice and the music in your voice, besides the songs themselves, I would just imagine it would be perfect for an audiobook. Is this something that you have, or have you planned on doing an audio version?
Someone asked me this question the last time Lynn and Lucia and I read the 3 L's reading at Hemingway. And I did intend to do it before the pandemic, and had actually was planning to like go record it because Pitt actually had a space where you could do that in the library, but I was very busy and it just didn't happen. But it was because I thought I could still do it. And then I actually bought the recording equipment. So I always have this intention of doing it, but I never have any time. So I have their recording equipment, and someday I will do it. And my publisher did say he would put it out whenever I did it. So I guess someday it will happen. Thank you.
Other questions? It's so great to see all of you here tonight. Really wonderful books. Please, again, get them if you don't have them. Order them from your local bookstore or bookshop.com. There's also the Village Bookstore in Pleasantville, New York. They supply our books for our readings when we're at the Hudson Valley Writers Center in Sleepy Hollow. We're excited that there's a vaccine, and we hope to see a lot of you at the center sometime next year. But we will still have a virtual reading series. So all these friends we've made in different states, we will still keep in touch with you, and we will still have you in our audience and to read. So we're going to make sure to continue along those lines. It's been a really good thing for poetry, I think, like so many of you have said, and Lynn was saying it's one of her favorite ways to appreciate poetry now. So that's been great. And Lynn, thank you for your new work. And it's always exciting when someone reads new work to the group and unveils it. And
it's scary.
It is, but you have nothing to worry about.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question.
Yes, you are, Lauren.
Because I wanted to ask Lynn, because you read some of that. I don't remember when we all read before. Was it 2018 or 2019? I'm losing track of time. But you were working on that manuscript then, and you started to talk a little bit about how the pandemic influenced it, but I'm curious to know more.
Well, I think what I was saying to Ellen is that, well, let's see, is that I was writing along, and I thought I was interested in film noir. I mean, I was interested in issues of class, especially in this small sort of deprived place in America. And it was painful and claustrophobic and also interesting. And as I kept writing, and went on to different subjects, some of which are quite personal, and I've never done that before, which doesn't mean they're all actual, but they are personal. I think that there started to be some kind of interesting connection with all of it being about disappearance. And a good friend of mine, I think she's here, Maggie Anderson, once said that, I think I quoted her, but that all autobiography is about disappearance. I mean, because why else do you write it? You know, in fact, I can't think of anything that, well, yeah. So I think that as I got, you know, further into other areas, the claustrophobia, the sense of loss, the disappearance, the falling away, all became sort of part of the mood of what I was writing. Was that an answer? I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
You should see the notes I have. What to say about what. And yeah. But I have to say, I did some homework. So I am going to share it with you, whether you're bored with hearing people read things or not, because it came from a Zoom group of women. It's four writers and a visual artist. And I'd ask them because Jennifer said, you know, you might want to talk about writing through the pandemic. And so I said to all these, my friends, I said, okay, so what are you doing? How are you writing through, and how are you living through the pandemic? So I'm going to read some of these, some of which strikes me as somewhat funny and some, you know, not so much. But it's also interesting. It's sort of practical. So here's the list. I burn sage. I'm practicing intermittent fasting. I'm alphabetizing my books. I'm writing political postcards. Now is so strange, I can't finish anything. I write book reviews. I am revising and publishing all my pre-COVID writing. I am more obsessive and more unsure of my work. And finally, the pandemic is trauma. It is quiet, amorphous, invisible, and controlling. And I think I just have to share those things, you know, because some of them, you know, if you can't write from the moment, write from your, you know, write from the moment before the pandemic. Yeah. Burn sage. Intermittent fasting. I don't know about that one. No, okay. All right. Jennifer's giving me a no. Yeah.
And for one last thing for all of you to answer, what advice do you have to writers working on their first collections? Because we have a lot of students at the Hudson Valley Writers Center who are doing just that right now and do have some extra time to be writing since we are locked down. So so maybe we'll start with Lucia. We'll just go in the order that you read in, and just a couple words of advice about putting together a first collection.
Yeah, sure. I've only put together a first collection, so I can't really give too much advice in terms of contrast, but I guess my advice would be to find your readers and find people who you you trust to take your work at what it needs to be. I think often maybe we look for advice from too many sources, and I think it's actually good to sort of call who you think your audience maybe is like more helpful for your work. Yeah, I think that would be my big advice. I think, and I've found this when people talk about their collections, but often, and maybe this isn't really good advice because I don't know how you could practically do it, but there always seems to be something where a writer says like, oh, I tried, maybe like Lauren, how you were saying, oh, I tried writing an iambic pentameter and it like broke something open and gave me some sense of discovery. And I felt that way a couple times when writing my book. So I would say just be open to prompts or ways of writing that maybe feel really foreign and feel really like not in your wheelhouse, because you might have discovery through that process.
Oh, it's my turn. I don't know. I think the problem I remember having was sort of the bookness of the book. Like I had a lot of sort of disparate stuff and it didn't quite make a book. I think so my book, I wrote it in a particular, like I wrote it in this MFA program and Lynn was on my committee and there were 2 other people on the committee and they all had very, very different ideas from each other. That was my first book, which I think tends to happen. But how shall I say it? So I was writing in one person's class, I was writing these like big, expansive, like collage poems. And that book is quite different from this book. And then the next person's class, they were like, there's no strong speaker, there's no I. So then I wrote, I wrote a lot of poems with a strong speaker, but I actually thought that was important because it was like cohesive, like it provided some sort of adhesion, some sort of glue for all these like speakerless poems, these like big expansive collage poems. And Lynn was really helpful with this sequencing of all this stuff, and also with sort of identifying the weaker poems that didn't really need to be in there. So I felt like it was something where maybe it would have been a very different book if I'd had a different committee. I felt like it was a product of different voices and different influences in a way that my second book wasn't so much.
That's really interesting. And Lynn, can you bring us back to putting together your first book or thoughts that you've formulated since the finish on the first book?
Yeah, I can't. I want to just say that I think Lucia and Lauren have said really smart things about putting together a first book. And I guess, you know, it's a struggle. It's a powerful struggle. And here's the bad news. As you go forward in your career, every book is a first book. And it just never ends. I mean, it's always, because it's always, you know, new, uncharted. Yeah. So every book is a first book. And I think, and you think that what you've learned is going to teach you how to write the second book or the third book. But I found that that wasn't so true, that those books were very different than my first book. And so I had to reimagine everything all over again and struggle again.
I think that's really important advice too. Really smart. And Marion Brown has a question. I'm going to ask her to unmute.
I got so interested, I almost have forgotten my question. Oh yeah, Lynn, the child or the young person who's observing seems to make something out of the very difficult, deprived circumstance, and sometimes shocking, and that's really interesting. And how did that come about? Or was that something you intended, or just is developing as you're writing the poems?
Well, thank you for that observation. I think it developed, and I think that there was always a tension between this rather bleak and sometimes dangerous, dystopian landscape, and language. And I think that the thing that is made out of this place has to do with my just joy over words. And so, you know, and not giving into the stereotypes of this kind of landscape. So always trying to sort of pry it loose, pry it out of the usual descriptors. And I think that, but thank you. And I think it just developed as I went along, but I think those were sort of two tensions. You know, I don't know how to describe the enjoyment of assonance and alliteration that went up against a very bleak place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And don't forget to buy books.